Cities After is a bi-monthly podcast about the future of cities. Grounded in our daily urban struggles, it is part dystopian and part utopian. My intention is to entice your civic imagination into action, because we know that a more just and sustainable urban future is possible. This is Miguel Robles-Duran, and I dare you to imagine our cities after.
COVID, global warming, gentrification,
homelessness,
racism,
colonialism,
patriarchy,
hunger,
police brutality,
Private profit, capitalism. This podcast is made possible by Democracy at Work.
Hybrid work and work from home, or WFH as it is commonly referred to, have become the most hyped modalities of labor exploitation across service-oriented urban regions post-pandemic. This seemingly unstoppable trend has rattled municipalities worldwide with never-seen office vacancy rates, in some business districts above 90%, while coinciding with record homelessness and the urgent demand for more affordable housing. In this episode, I will try to theorize about some of the capitalist dynamics at play, dystopian consequences, and possible contradictory outcomes. In part 1, I attempted to show how urban planning, a discipline defined by the late French Marxist theorist Guy Debord as, and I open quote, the very technology of separation, end quote, has aided the capitalist extraction of value in cities by supporting the fragmentation of daily life into functionalist segments guided by a rational interpretation of human productive capacities. This is the main reason most cities have separate office districts, residential districts, manufacturing districts, or shopping districts, nightlife districts, and so on. Zoning is the urban planning instrument that has frozen this spatial separation into laws and ordinances. And as technical as it may seem, zoning remains the paramount directive that orders urban development worldwide. As I emphasized in the last episode, this spatial separation is essentially the abstraction of daily life at the service of capital. And I asked, how would this abstraction change if the function of office districts suddenly compresses into the household, into your home? If the functional spaces of office towers are squeezed into the living rooms of those that used to be office workers, would the separation end? Or on the contrary, will the separation be perfected? Let's start with the premise that modern urban space has separated our daily activities into specialized zones. To those living their lives like this statement might be so naturalized that conceiving a spatially unified way of living may seem impossible. Yet, those people know others who have been doing hybrid work or working from home all their lives. In our hitherto patriarchal societies, a highly exploitative example, under capitalism of course, would be housework and child rearing, or the many times of first and second incomes that come from manual labor, crafting, repairing, assembling, or cooking commodities from home to be sold in local or online marketplaces. But those are not the jobs most people think of when hybrid work or working from home is discussed and fantasized about today. It appears that the fantasy of many office workers is to continue their exploitative contractual relationship in the comfort of their homes. Wearing slippers, half pajamas, while attending a morning Zoom meeting with the corporate overlords, and later spending most of the day interacting in Slack with coworkers, staring at the same computer screen they had when they used to work from an office cubicle. No dreadful commute, no expensive lunch, and no in-person interaction with work colleagues and bosses beyond business time. How terrible it must be at the office to desire to surrender private space at home to your daily exploiter. I think this is the biggest socio-spatial contradiction of hybrid work and working from home. Rather than distancing workers from the dehumanizing experience of office work under capitalism, that experience is voluntarily filtered into their bedrooms, right next to where they make love, or in their kitchen, right next to where they lovingly cook for their friends and families. The popular shift in service labor conventions that would seemingly appear to facilitate an urban unification of daily life is instead extending the separation into the intimate environment of workers' homes. The atomization of workers' social capacity that capitalism relies on now compresses even further into the household and fragments what used to be their private refuge from work. Separation perfected. But wait, why would they want to go back to the office? Isn't that a worse environment than working from home? Well, yes, in most cases. And that is precisely the point I want to delve into. One steering outcome of the pandemic is that more and more people grew somewhat aware of their alienated existence in the office. Now semi-conscious of their daily sacrifice of their productive capacity to an exploitative and toxic corporate culture, many started to look for a way out, or at least a partial way. And the worldwide demand for job flexibility in the form of hybrid work or working from home began. Interestingly enough, most of the corporate world embraced the demand with rapid technological adaptations to make this shift possible. After all, if companies wanted to remain profitable, they had to innovate on this front. Almost 3 years after the pandemic began, hybrid work and work from home seem to have become standard features in white-collar environments. According to a collaborative study of 25,000 working Americans conducted in the spring of this year by the mega corporate consulting agency McKinsey, together with the mega market research firm Ipsos, said that all workers, or 58% of them, had the option of hybrid work. That is, 58% had the option of working from home at least 1 day a week. And 35% had the option of working fully from home. Even more striking from this study is that 87% of all the workers interviewed would choose hybrid work or work from home over being full-time in a traditional workplace. If statistically extrapolated to the broader population, the sample means that at least 80 million Americans out of the 158 million currently employed already engage in one of these flexible work modalities. These numbers are indeed staggering, demonstrating that this is not just a work trend. Office work culture has been permanently altered, heralding a complete paradigm shift in labor relations, societal development, and how we relate to the intimate and urban spaces we inhabit. Cutting on commuting time, overall well-being, and flexibility to balance family life were the top reasons why workspace flexibility was overwhelmingly preferred by the workers interviewed in another recent national survey, this time by Gallup. Yet, despite these apparent advantages, labor exploitation continues, penetrating even further into people's homes and private livelihoods. Somehow, being inside one of our homes makes it seem less violent. a very advantageous form of appeasement, if you ask me. Workers around the world are generously offered the possibility of less office presence. But for the most, their salaries remain low and stagnant. In other not-so-lucky cases, workers must agree to take a pay cut for the privilege of working from home. If work productivity had been affected by this shift, capitalist corporations would have eliminated this possibility in one way or another. Still, the reality is that having employees working from home has saved companies a reasonable sum of money. Not only in direct expenses related to office facilities and operations, for example, now workers are subsidizing part of these expenses, but in the human relations department. Less employee interaction means fewer cases to deal with, and, of course, a diminished probability of having an organized workforce that challenges their forms of exploitation. What seems like a worker triumph has been a goldmine for corporations. While ex-office workers rejoice in working from home, shareholders claim record profits. CEOs and top executives continue to raise their bonuses, and billionaire owners make more billions. Everybody knows that in the exchange for the opportunity, as they call it, of doing your job on your kitchen counter while being spied on, you have to make them more profit. That's how it goes. Everybody knows. The poor stay poor, the rich get rich, and the record social inequalities that we had before the pandemic continue to increase at a dramatic rate. I dare to say that working from home has had no progressive social benefit. If anything, it has made exploitation a little bit more tolerable. And we must ask, who benefits from this more? The transformation towards an immediate future where working from home is permanently accepted as a standard offering in the corporate world is almost complete. McKinsey & Company and other mega consultancies like Boston Consulting, Deloitte, Accenture, Bain, and PricewaterhouseCoopers have been hard at work advising companies that if they want to remain competitive and retain talent, there is no going back. And radical changes in the way we work and the way work is conducted must be implemented at speed. McKinsey broadly recommends the following. I open quotes. Employers are wise to invest in technology, adapt policies, and train employees to create workspaces that integrate people working remotely and on-site without overcompensating by requiring that workers spend too much time in video meetings. Companies want to thoughtfully think about which roles can be done partially or fully remotely, and be open to the idea that there could be more of these than is immediately apparent. Employers can define the right metrics and track them to make sure the new flexible model is working. I end quote. Companies will be tracking and measuring employees' productive output from their bedrooms in a similar way they were doing it when they were working at the office. Your homes are becoming their new offices, and their old offices are becoming new homes. And this is the other half of the transformation. The rise of remote work is triggering a tectonic change in how cities functioned since modern urban planning became the norm. Empty office towers, ghost business districts, and more work colleagues from the overseas signal the partial death of the happy hour, business meals, and the entertainment quarters that accommodated them. Famously busy business areas are now struggling to stay economically viable. To illustrate this predicament, I want to draw attention to a recent journalistic report made by Bloomberg Media about office vacancies in the east part of Midtown Manhattan, one of the hardest hit areas in New York City. The report points to one of the most significant urban consequences of working from home. I open quotes. In the heart of Midtown Manhattan lies a multi-billion-dollar problem for building owners, the city, and thousands of workers. Blocks of decades-old office towers sit partially empty, in an awkward position. Too outdated to attract tenants seeking the latest amenities, too new to be demolished or converted for another purpose. Companies sometimes simply cut back on space to reduce their real estate costs. Others are relocating to shiny new towers with top-of-the-line amenities to attract talent and employees who may be reluctant to leave the comforts of working from home. Left behind are older buildings outside of prime locations. I end quote. Office vacancy upwards of 30% is now standard in many business-oriented urban areas. Major metropolitan parts of cities like New York City, London, Paris, Singapore, and Tokyo still might have the allure to attract shrunken corporate headquarters into their new shiny office towers. After all, these cities retain an economic might to mitigate crisis. But what will happen to the hundreds of urban office districts, new and old, that before the pandemic accommodated corporate branches, subsidiary offices, and smaller companies worldwide? As a direct consequence of record vacancy rates, municipalities across continents have been dealing with the loss of considerable revenue from office leasing taxes and the decline of commuters and business travelers, whose demand from business infrastructures and related activities, such as congress centers and hotels, has dwindled. Not to mention the freeze of new construction activity and the loss of income from all the short-stay apartments that continue uninhabited, together with the commercial activity that office space users used to feed. This is why analysts all over have been sounding alarms over looming urban fiscal crisis. The avalanche of urban perplexities caused by the paradigmatic shift to remote work has city officials working overclock, trying to figure out solutions to all of this. And so far, the most popular solution is to support the speed up of the conversion of vacant office towers into residential apartments. The argument is, after all, commonsensical. Let me quote a section of an article written a few weeks ago in Texas Monthly. And I open quote. The cost of single-family homes has skyrocketed, and interest rates have risen, making many would-be buyers renters. And relatively few apartments are available, with vacancy levels in single digits and pricey monthly rents expected to get even pricier. I think it checks all the boxes. Chuck Dennis, an adjunct professor of practice in real estate at Southern Methodist University, says of the office to apartment trend. You get empty spaces filled, and you get some people back into the inner city, and you increase the tax rolls. I think all of that is good. I end quote. Or in the words of Dan Adamski, a senior managing director of JLL, a global corporate real estate service company. I open quote. From the supply side, many of the older office buildings have no choice but to consider repositioning their assets as the flight to quality trend results in tenants leaving their building. Decreasing demand for office space combined with increasing residential demand means many building owners can obtain more income per square foot from apartments. I end quote. Not surprisingly, the real estate industry has been one of the most vocal promoters of this office conversion trend. After decades of working diligently to create the affordable housing crisis we are in, they are now claiming office tower conversions are an urgent undertaking if we are to solve the housing crisis. This is how they are framing it. Do a quick Google search on the topic of office adaptive reuse. You will find thousands of reports, newsletters, blog posts, official calls to action, and news articles from the real estate industry in a concerted effort to push policy changes in government. Interestingly enough, one of the two things that they demand is what progressive planners have been asking for without success for decades: the elimination, or at least the softening, of zoning codes and zoning restrictions. Yes, I'm talking about zoning again. The planning tool for social spatial separation under capitalism. So the real estate industry faces a slew of complications if they want to succeed in extracting more value out of those empty office towers. Residential development legislation and policy, although different in every city around the world, usually include an array of dwelling law caps that limits residential floor ratios, specific building codes that regulate the quality and safety of dwellings, infrastructure regulations that specify things from parking requirements to road layouts and connections to energy grids and sewage systems. And, of course, zoning laws that restrict residential occupation in different areas of the city. The proposition of converting offices to housing is anything but simple, and in some cases, almost inconceivable. For example, office towers with deep core-to-window floor arrangements would be next to impossible to convert. The landlords would have difficulty maximizing their profitable square footage while complying with residential codes. For many of these buildings, it would make more financial sense for them to demolish and build anew. This brings me to the second demand from the real estate industry: subsidies. This was stated very clearly in a testimony to the New York State Assembly standing committees from the Real Estate Board of New York, perhaps the city's most powerful organization besides the municipal government. And I open quote, "A tax incentive program will be needed to offset the physical costs of conversions, lost rent collections, and ensure upgrades aligned with the latest sustainability targets." I end the quote. And many cities are giving the industry what they want. Government subsidy programs and fiscal incentives for landlords and developers to convert office towers into housing are being approved by city councils worldwide. But here's the catch. Governments have been giving tax abatements and all kinds of subsidies to the real estate industry for decades. And look at the housing crisis around you. Whether you are in Mexico City, Calgary, Amsterdam, Cape Town, Los Angeles, or Paris, there is an excess of stock of luxury housing and almost a negative supply of affordable dwellings. The reliance on private developers to solve the crisis has turned cities into open-air shopping malls for property speculators, allowing them to wreak havoc on their populations right to the city. So what will make it different this time? Nothing. This is the dismal answer. Unless cities are prepared to challenge the 40-plus years of neoliberal urban development policies with the enforcement of permanently affordable housing, limited equity guidelines, and non-speculative property models, the most significant percentage of these office-to-housing conversions will end up as luxury real estate for the gambling obsessions of venture capitalists. As a matter of fact, they are already becoming that. Statements like the following one from Jonas Woods, the CEO of Woods Capital, a Dallas-based property developer, can be found in all kinds of press releases from the recent real estate newsletters. And I open quote, "By converting vacant office spaces into luxury multifamily housing, we can create a more vibrant mixed-use neighborhood and meet the growing demand caused by migration to the area." I end quote. The post-pandemic late-stage capitalism's reconceptualization of housing is hardly any different than the pre-pandemic one. Developers are willing to convert offices or build new homes as long as they can continue to get high-yield profits and long-term tax incentives that also translate into profits. But what has changed dramatically is that cities are losing tax revenues from the ghost-like office zones that once were seen as triumphs of capitalism and its modernist planning principles. Landlords may have many empty buildings, but the last decades have shown us that they can leverage vacancies well. Just look at how many vacant luxury housing buildings and districts plague our cities. After all, these units end up as commodities in investment portfolios. The adaptive reuse programs and policies are a great government incentive for landlords to extract more value from a commodity that has stalled. Still, they are hardly a serious proposition for fulfilling the social needs and desires to make more socially and environmentally just cities. A touted economic revival based on adaptive reuse that mimics pre-pandemic conditions of inequality and separation is not something we can afford to accept. Yes, the transformation of offices could make urban centers less hollow. Municipalities may be able to levy more taxes. But unless we challenge the profit-seeking conversion ventures with public takeovers of vacant buildings, innovative social policies, and new forms of community-controlled housing workspaces, expect an aggravation of the crisis, with more intrusion of private corporations into your personal space. I believe that office tower vacancies provide an opportunity to rethink housing arrangements toward more collective and sustainable forms of living. We can reinvent work-living environments where empty buildings become inclusive homes with environments that all populations can work unified instead of separated. We must counter the invasive hybrid work approaches that corporations are promoting worldwide with new imaginaries and push them into policy. As I have said many times before, active imagination is the only way out.
This was another episode of Cities After. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe.